Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I thought we'd just take a minute while we're indoors to have a look a little bit deeper at one of the rigs that I mentioned in my previous video about my top 5 rigs for spring fishing. So today we're gonna have a look at the Hinged stiff rig and how to tie it. So yeah, let's just dive straight in. So a few things you're gonna need. You're gonna need some stiff material to actually tie the hinge section with. And for me, my favorite one so far has been the rigidity from Fox. I'll go for the 25 pound, which is 0.53. That's fantastic. It's really stiff and it just ties beautifully. I've never had a problem and it absolutely rock solid. You need a puller tool. You need some putty to weigh the rig down after you've got your pop-up on. You're gonna need a baiting needle, some bait floss, a lighter, some sharp scissors. You're gonna need a ring swivel, a micro ring swivel, and a good pattern of hook. So the right pattern of hook for this style of rig is something with an outwards turned eye that just allows the line to exit at the correct angle to give your hook that perfect hooking properties, and also to maintain the strength on the knot and create that D at the back of the hook there at the right angle. That's the style of hook you want to go for. My favorite for these style of rigs is a straight point hook. Over the previous years, I used to use the beak point hooks a lot, but I just find the hookup success ratio is much better on the straight point hooks, and you just tend to land more fish. And then you're going to need a pop-up to actually bait your rig. Mine's just a 15mm, but you can go as small as a 12mm if you like. My favorite thing to do is to drill them out slightly and add a little bit of cork, and that's just gonna aid with the buoyancy of the rig and keep everything presented perfectly for a much longer period of time. So to begin with, we're going to take a length of our rigid material, and I've just taken off about 10 inches of the material here. So we're going to take our ring swivel with the big ring, not the micro ring swivel, and we're going to take the small end of the swivel, so the small part attached to the barrel, and we're going to just thread the line straight through. And I'm going to pull it through just a couple of inches, so you've got the majority of the material to the right hand side. And this is the way I like to tie it. I'm going to tie a little blood knot. So pull the tag end around the outside of the material once, twice, 3 times, and then just back through. You don't really need to go any more than 2 or 3 turns on this because the material is so stiff and rigid that the knot just holds every single time. I've never ever had one slip, and I've tied them with as little as 2 loops before, but 3 is my favorite, so I'll go for that one. So you're going to need to wet the knot down completely with a little bit of saliva, and then just pour the knot down gently, easing it in with your thumb and by pulling. So that's the knot wetted down. Just going to ease that down gently, and we're going to use the puller tool now on the swivel. You could be quite rough with this material because it is very strong. And then just remember, I like to pull the tag end at the last minute, just between my teeth, and then pull this end and this end with the puller tool. There we go. So let's just bed that down nice and tight. The knot is very tiny, but very, very strong. So now we can snip off that tag end as close as you like. Some people like to blob it down with a lighter, but I don't really mind. I've never had one slip, so I'll just leave it like that for now. So now we've got our swivel attached to our material. So now it's time to tie on our hook. So let's take our hook like this. As you'll see, the material comes off the swivel with a natural curve, the way it came off of the spool. So we're going to use that natural curve to our advantage, and we're going to thread the hook away from the point. So what we're going to do is we're going to thread that hook down, judge roughly how high we want the pop-up to sit. So if we want it to be around there, which is about 2 inches long, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow another ½ an inch for that knot to be pulled down, and I'm going to push the hook all the way down to the knot. And now I'm going to create at the back of the hook, using the tag end, I'm going to create another loop just like this. So you're pinning the tag end now essentially against the back of the hook, and you've got a loop here that's formed. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this piece of the loop, and I'm going to just whip around the shank and around the tag end. I'm going to go once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. And then we're going to just gently ease down the tag end to pull that loop through. So let's just straighten that all up. Everything comes through nice and neat. There we go. So when we're at a point where we think we're going to create a bit of friction by pulling it down tight, this is where we wet the knot completely. There we go. So that's everything nice and wet now. Let's use the puller tool again. Just ease that knot down nice and tight. And as you can see, the knot now sits quite high up the shank. Let's just make sure everything's bedded down nice and tight. And then we're going to just use our thumbnail on the back of the eye of the hook and our thumbnail here on the knot, and just ease everything down and pull everything down so the knot slides down towards the eye of the hook. And as you can see, that's allowed enough gap now where that's slipped through, and we've created our perfect little section here. Really stiff, rigid material, and that's a perfect little pop-up rig. Now all we need to do is create the D section to actually mount the hook bait. So here, we're gonna thread on our micro ring swivel. So on the micro ring swivel, you've got, again, the barrel section, and then you've got the loop. This time we're going to go through the loop, just like that. Thread that right down towards the hook, and this is where we push the tag end back through the eye of the hook and pull it right down almost until that gap is closed. So there's a tiny little D section there, and I'm going to snip off the tag end just a couple of mil short at the back of the hook, and we'll use our lighter to just blob that knot down. There we go. Now that's completely blobbed down, we can ease it back through by pulling the ring swivel, and that creates a perfect little loop there at the back of our hook. So that is essentially our chod section of the hinged stiff rig tied. So this you could run up and down a leader and fish it like a chod rig. The way I like to fish them is as the hinged stiff rig. I just prefer the hookup ratio on these because you're fishing off a lead clip. I find them really successful in terms of the hookup ratios coming off the lead clip instead of off of a helicopter rig. So now let's go ahead and tie our boom section. So for the boom section of this rig, again, we're going to use the rigidity. So we're going to take off another section of around 10 inches, snip that off. So now we've got our length of material for our boom section. What we're going to do is create a little loop at the end of that. And this is where we create a little bit of flexibility and maneuverability in the rig. So we create a little loop here. We're going to take the ring swivel from the chod section and just thread it down the tag end, just like this. And then we're going to use that tag end to go around the loop and then use the tag end to go between both loops. So this is tying a knot that we call the perfect loop knot. And now in order to pull everything through, we're going to push the rig first through this loop, the loop at the back. So it's a little bit fiddly, but once you've got it down, it's nice and easy. So now you've pulled that rig through, it's gonna pull the first loop through as well. So it's gonna create a little loop like this. You can see there, we're gonna wet everything down and then we're gonna pull it up nice and tight. So that's everything nice and wet now. Just ease it down, pulling that tag end. And I'm gonna wrap it around my finger. I'm just gonna pull everything really tight. Again, you can be quite rough with this material. It's really strong. And then we use the puller tool as well. Just put it through the loop, pull everything down really tight, super strong. And then we can just snip off that tag end. And as you can see there, we've got a perfect little loop here. So that rig is able to move around that loop as freely as it likes. That's going to create a lot of movement in your rig. So if you're using putty to weigh this down, you can just blob a little bit of putty around the knot of the loop, and that's going to make sure that everything's critically balanced and it's going to sit with loads of room to move. And the reason I like to use the perfect loop knot is that, as it says on the tin, it is a perfect loop. It comes out dead straight from the material and you don't get any kink of it sitting over slightly funny like you would with a figure-of-8 loop knot. This one's dead straight and it makes your boom sections look really tidy and work perfectly. So there we go. So that's the boom section essentially tied. Now all we need to do is tie another loop the other end. And this time round, I don't mind tying a figure-of-8 loop knot or a perfect loop knot, but for this one, I'll just do another perfect loop knot. So again, another little loop around the loop, line between both loops, and then we're gonna pull the front loop through the back loop. Just like that. Bed it down, snip it off. There we go. So we're gonna put the puller tool through one loop. I'm gonna hold the other loop in my hand. I'm just gonna pull a couple of times. That's going to create enough friction in the rig material, pull everything nice and tight. So that's our perfect little hinged stiff rig section there. Now all we need to do is mount our hook bait and then add a little bit of putty to weigh everything down. So again, I like to use a bait drill for this process, and that gives me a lot more confidence in my pop-ups. When you're fishing on a lake that maybe you can only cast once or twice, or you don't want to spook the fish, so you don't want to mess around with casting many times, I know that when I put my rig out, it's going to be presented perfectly every single time, and I'm not going to have to worry ever about the rig sitting funny or maybe the pop-up not holding up perfectly, because with that bit of cork in there, buoyancy is not going to change at all. So we're going to just drill out the pop-up with the bait drill. There we go. So we're going to drill about 3/4 of the way through the pop-up, creating a perfect little hole. This is our piece of cork that I've already cut to size. I tend to have quite a few of them already cut up, because once I've tied a rig, when that rig is done with, I'll just remove the bit of cork and keep that, because there's nothing wrong with them. There's no point wasting loads of things. So there we go, we take our baiting needle. The easiest thing to do is push the baiting needle through the cork first, and that's gonna make it a lot easier to push through the bait. There we go, so just remove that. Now we can pop that into the pop-up, and as you can see there, that's an almost perfect fit. A tiny bit of cork sticking out, but we can just trim that off with our scissors if we're worried about that. There we go, and now I like to push the baiting needle back through the hole of the cork, come out the top of the pop-up, and again, then remove it, and that creates the hole at the top of the pop-up, so we can actually mount our hook bait. So let's go through that hole, which is gonna bring us perfectly through the hole in the cork, and that's ready to mount now. So what we're gonna do is take our length of bait floss. So what we're gonna do is take our rig, so we're just gonna thread the bait floss through the small eye on the micro ring swivel and pull it up so it's doubled over. And with enough room, we're going to thread on our pop-up onto that bait floss, and then we're gonna pull the bait floss through. I like to pull the bait floss through a little way up the bait floss. That way you're not pulling it down onto the swivel, and then when you try to pull the bait floss through, sometimes you can pull the pop-up too far onto the ring swivel, which closes the gap between the pop-up and the hook, and that gap is essential for the hook hold. So I like to have a little bit of separation. So let's pull everything down now. We're gonna pull the pop-up just onto the barrel of the swivel, just like that. So you can see the cork and the barrel of the swivel are perfectly aligned. Now we're just gonna snip off the tag end of our bait floss, leaving just a couple of mil short. I'm gonna blob that down using the lighter. I don't like to leave too much bait floss because when you burn it down, it leaves a little black dot on top of your pop-up, and I like it to be quite clear and actually stay a little bit more invisible, because that's going to be the bit that the carp see first, to be honest with you. When they approach from the top, they're going to see that black dot, and sometimes that can spook them off. So that's a perfect little hook bait mounted on a lovely little rig there. Now, all we need to do is just to weight that down. I've been doing this enough times now to know that piece of putty about the size of a BB shot is absolutely perfect for this. But what you can do is when you're at the lake, you can just test it in the margin, add a tiny bit of putty, and then just keep removing or adding as you need to make that hook bait either sink really fast or really slow, depending on where you're fishing and what you're fishing over. If I'm fishing over completely clear ground or ground that's got little tiny pieces of weed every now and then, I like to make sure that my hook bait sinks quite fast. That way it's not going to get hung up on any of those little pieces, and it's going to be presented perfectly every single time. But if you're fishing over quite deep weed, then you're going to want to have a slightly longer boom section depending on how deep the weed is. And I like to have it so there's only just enough putty to actually sink the hook bait, so it sinks super slowly and it sits up perfectly presented above that weed. And when you put your scouring of boilies or boilie chops over the top, they flutter down and they land and create a perfect little patch. So yeah, your hook bait is going to be presented absolutely perfectly. And there we go. That's how we tie a perfect little hinge stiff rig. And if you make sure that you tie on the ring swivel first, then you can judge exactly the distance that you want between the hook and the swivel. And remember, you can use different materials for the boom section. This is just the stiff material just for the demonstration to show you. But if you want to use an uncoated braid or a soft coated braid, that works perfectly as well. My favorite is actually a soft coated braid, but it's just a lot easier to tie for the demonstration to show you with this material. You can tie exactly the same loop knots and knots with any of these materials, but when it's a soft coated braid or an uncoated braid, I like to just tie the knot directly to the ring on the ring swivel, because there's enough movement in the rig already with that soft material. So that's the rig. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed watching this one, and hopefully it's been useful for you. Feel free to leave me a comment, or if you get out and try this rig and you catch some fish, let me know how you go on. So thanks for watching, guys. Make sure to give me a thumbs up, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.